We often hear that diversity, equity, and inclusion matters to businesses, but their data tells a different story. So what is the missing piece? On Finding Diversity, we tell real stories of what has worked for others and provide experiences that will inspire you. I'm Justus Thompson, and this is where our journey begins. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Finding Diversity, the Missing Piece. Today, we're joined by Kasheef Wyzard, the National Director of Dream.org. Kasheef is dedicated to using technology to create opportunities for underrepresented communities and promoting empathy and inclusivity in the workplace. We're excited to have Kasheef on the show today and share his thoughts on the future of the tech industry and the work being done by Dream.org. I'm your host, Justus Thompson. Let's dive in. Kasheef, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm super. You look so dapped up right now. I have to say, I'm super excited with this type of look. I'm excited to get into today's conversation.
Yeah, well, I received those words of affirmation. I'm one, and it's taken a while, but I step into work that I do as my whole self, and being authentic, and that's something it took me. I had to push through some obstacles, some challenges to get to that point, but that's how I show up best, and that's how we all show up. So looking forward to having this conversation.
I love that. And I think that's a perfect segue into kind of our kickoff every time, which is this thing called Cape U. Essentially, it's one thing about your younger self, one thing you like about your culture, or something unique about me. We're going to twist it this month and probably going forward is you can either share one on all three of those or pick one that speaks to you and tell a story. I'll go first. I'm going to just tell a story about one. And this is something, it's kind of one thing about my younger self, but it might also kind of fit culture. But when I was younger, I was out playing in a neighborhood that was predominantly white out in Oklahoma. It was in Edmond, very, very small, kind of not small town, but kind of, suburb of the city. And I was out there playing with all of my friends who happened to be white, obviously in a white neighborhood, playing around the pool house. And I remember, someone obviously must not have liked how we were playing. We were playing tag, being kids, being rambunctious and running over this community pool house. And they called the cops. And so the cops, they roll up, we're running, we're playing freeze tag, I think of all things. And we hear over the cops, right? We keep running because we don't think they're here for us. We're kids, we're playing, haven't done anything wrong. And they say, get over here, right? Gets over here. Long story short, the cop is very, very angry, right? And as a kid, I didn't really understand it. I had not actually had the whole talk as of yet, because I'm sure you know what that talk is around police forces. So I got very nervous and I wasn't quite ready. As soon as he asked for it for my birthday and for my name and address, which I'm dyslexic, I always have really trouble remembering those things. But as soon as I paused, he yelled at me, "Boy, you think about lying to me," and ended up throwing me in the back of the cop car for no reason. I think at the time I might have been 12 or 14. Tears are rolling down my face. I was really lucky that my parents happened to be driving down the pool house. They were actually about to go watch a movie with my sister. They pulled over and were able to get me out of the cop car and take me back to the house. And that's actually when I had that first conversation, that talk with my father about what my interactions with police forces would be like. And I think the one thing that has always stuck with me of all of that was one of my best friends. His name was Crispy. He was a really big guy. I was a running back on the football team. Always have a soft spot in my heart for the big dudes on the offensive line. That's who he was. He was a big guy on the offensive line. He came to the door and we didn't have to say anything because he was already crying. There was tears in his eyes and he just hugged me, and we just hugged and we cried, and we were just two boys who in that moment understood that life would be different for me, and he had a lot of empathy and compassion. And so to answer the question, I think that's one thing that I really like about my country. I think the South is something that is a whole separate conversation. But to me, I think that empathy that just happens as human beings, when we have that empathy, that understanding for our friends, oftentimes it can change our perspectives and outlooks. So that's one thing of my Cape U exercise. And with that, I will hand it over to you. If you need a refresher on what those three things after me talking your ear off, I can go ahead and do that as well.
No, thank you for sharing your story. And you've said a word which frankly, is my North Star, which is
Mm,
empathy.
mm,
And it's actually tattooed on my chest, a literal North Star. Empathy is my North Star. And I know, I'm confident that I have such high empathy is because of the experiences that I've had. You know, I'm the literal sum of my experiences, just as are you. So, thinking about this challenge, I guess a story I'll tell about my younger self. So I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts. What's interesting is that, especially when I talk to other people of color, black and brown folk, they're like, "There's black people in Boston." Yeah, yeah. There's black people in Boston for sure. Specifically, I'm from Dorchester, Massachusetts, and like any inner city, there are many challenges. Especially for the community I was raised in, and communities like the one that I was raised in. Um, I can go two directions, but I'm going to give insight to the community I was raised in, the challenges that were there. So let me tell two quick ones. All right.
yeah,
So when I was young, when people would ask me what I wanted to be, I would actually say police officer or fireman. And
interesting.
the reasons why is because I had exposure to those professions. I had multiple uncles and aunts that were police officers, and then I had a an uncle that was a fireman. And I'll tell
Gotcha.
the story in regards to firemen really quick. Uh, I used to always see my uncle's truck, engine 23, on my street, right? And like, to me, that was awesome. You hear the fire truck, you see the smoke down the street. I see engine 23 because his engine was the closest to my house, and I'm looking for Uncle Keith. And I felt cool because that's gonna bring people outside, and I get to point and say, "There's my uncle." That was, I didn't realize until probably 12 years old or so, that the reason why I would always see my uncle's truck on my street was because the houses that kept catching fire on my street were crack houses, right?
Mm,
So I didn't even know that. I just knew that, oh man, it's cool as hell. My uncle's truck. Woo, I hear the alarm. I'm outside. I'm looking for Uncle Keith, right? Um, that's the environment that I grew up in. And you don't know as a child. Again, we're the literal sum of our experiences. And I'm just so fortunate that I had the parents, I had the family that I had, that was intentional to give me exposure to dream beyond what I saw on the day to day. So that's a quick story in regards to why I wanted to be a fireman initially. I'm gonna give you another quick story in regards to how I learned to protect myself, but also just another vehicle that kept me uh, you know, out of those traditional traps that are in communities like where I was raised. So I was also a black belt in Taekwondo growing up, and I won the Junior Olympics when I was
whoa.
12, a gold medal in sparring and forms, and also back to back. I won it when I was 13 as well. And
Wow.
the only reason why I took martial arts, again, I had a cousin, actually the son of one of those police officers, who excelled in Taekwondo as well. And I joined the New Vision Taekwondo school, which was actually just, a youth pastor that so happened to be a black belt in multiple forms of martial arts. He taught us inner city kids Taekwondo, really to keep us off the street,
Wow.
because when I think about it, once we all got older and stopped practicing, the amount of my peers that either died or got locked up that were in that same school with me. So I'm really just elevating. What was dope is traveling up and down the East Coast, you know, um, knocking heads off, literally, in all these tournaments. And when we walk in, we were always like the only all black school or all black martial arts school walking in. And there was always, whispers and all that stuff. And there's a bunch of inner city kids. They especially, I got in a little trouble sometimes, but they got in a lot of trouble when we were amongst ourselves. Got disciplined all the time, got scolded. Just a lot of you know growing and learning and fun moments, frankly, growing up. But whenever we stepped into these spaces, I would the fact that our sensei, our youth pastor as well, would always make sure to tell us afterwards, the praise that everybody was giving us, because we would leave with the most gold medals, the most trophies, but everybody was just always so impressed and shocked at how well behaved we were in those spaces. And again, that's just because of the leadership and the instruction that we got, and the discipline we got along the way. But the way that we would show up in these spaces, kick ass, take names, but also everybody speak highly of us. We ended up getting a caption in Taekwondo magazine back then too. So I
There you
say
go.
all that to say, just to give you insight to uh, really the interventions, the access to programming, the exposure to professions beyond, again, what I saw every day, just the exposure, what was informing and shaping me, frankly, protecting me, putting me on a different trajectory to end up where I am today.
Thank you for sharing. I think that's amazing, and definitely something that I think I just really relate to empathy being your North Star. I think that is uh, very true of me as well. I think the empathy thing is crucial, and for anybody who really is trying to do this work, I think that is incredibly important. I think
Yeah.
there's a unique intersection here as well. Is tell me how your empathy led you to dream.org. Like what was this career journey of how you ended up of dream.org, and what's the mission of dream.org? Like wrap this up for us.
Yeah. So just to say one comment in regards specifically to empathy, again, it's because I grew up in it, and I know it was exposure that enabled me to dream. I had access to build on those dreams. Um, I had space to fail forward as a young black boy, space to lead eventually as a black man, and affirmation all throughout the process of my development to believe in myself. That's the only reason why I ascended and ended up at a dream.org. And what empathy what empathy allows, I'm going to go back to that word space. Like I'm just meeting you, and we're vibing right now, right? But even if we weren't vibing and the response or the conversation was going a different way, because of because I know that we're all just the literal sum of our experiences, that empathy pushes me to pause before I react. It pushes me to pause.
Mm,
It pushes me to reflect, and frankly, just understand that however or the reason why what came out your mouth came out that way has been informed by some experiences that you've had, not necessarily my experiences. And it just gives me so much control, and an unshakable commitment for people that come from communities like mine. I know there's been your life experience may have been filled with trauma. I know you've had challenges, and I can see or hear beyond what's in front of me right now. Right. So I just wanted to say that real quick in regards to empathy. And I spoke about what now are my development principles, but
mhm,
that is how I that is what changed the trajectory of my life. So in terms of how I got here, right? I'm from a inner city. My parents put me in a program when I was 7 years old, where I bused to school through a program called the Metco. And the Metco, Boston, Boston is known to be racist, and right, it's
mhm.
different. It's the North. It's a different type of racism. It's systemic, right? And if you Google right now, the wealth disparity regarding black and white folk in the city of Boston. Let's just say the average wealth in a or income or wealth in a white household is over 200,000, like $250,000. The average net worth of black household is $8. I'm not
Mm.
making that up, right? We don't. There's no ownership in that city. We don't own anything. So I bring that up, right? Speaking of systemic racism and some of the images that you see regarding Boston. Boston was also very became famous. I just use that word infamous, right, for
Mhm.
the busing riots, right? Um, and as I think and look at my life, wow, I'm a child of the busing riots. I was in a busing program that was birthed in 1974.
Yeah.
That's when MECO was formed, which was on the back end of those busing riots. But there was this need to get these kids like myself, access to better education. So went to school an hour away. One of a few black kids had the word, excuse my language, nigger spray painted or in marker on my locker.
Hmm.
I had all those experiences, but at the same time, I had access now to better resources. And a lot of people saw the good and saw great in me. And those words of affirmation along the way, the space to be a leader amongst kids, and later on, all of that, it seeds were planted. And the dichotomy between where I lived and what I saw going to school, and me at an early age realizing, dang, the kids in my neighborhood, their experience is different than mine. Or realizing later on, like, dang, I got more, like, and I'll tell you about my dad because it all connects, right? But just realizing I had more, and I just had a lot of questions. I'm a how, why kid. Like, why is my life different? Why, even though I live here, I'm hearing the same gunshots. I'm seeing, like, but it's different here, and why is that? So I know that school, that intervention, educational intervention, out the gate, changed the trajectory of my life. Fast forward, I moved from Boston to Georgia when I'm 16, and I go from that city to now I'm in Atlanta, Metro Atlanta, and I am frankly surrounded by affluent black people. You know what I'm saying? Like people who now I'm seeing black ownership. I'm seeing, just the culture. It's different. It feels safe down here. Don't get it twisted. There's unsafe areas in every corner market, but it just felt different. I didn't have to ask my parents to wear my good jacket outside. I didn't have to, I didn't have to do
Yeah.
all that stuff, right? So, and black brown folk getting to the money out here, right?
Hmm.
So, boom, there goes more exposure, right? This is something else that's shaping me, putting me on the trajectory that ultimately I'm on. I graduate high school. I go to Georgia State University, which graduates the most black people of any college in this country. And I have that experience, and I end up in traditional corporate following my graduation. I graduated with a marketing degree, which that we should note that because now I work in tech, right?
Hmm.
So I graduated from college. I end up working in big tobacco, and I'm working for RJ Reynolds. All of a sudden, I'm displaced for one. I moved from Atlanta to Louisiana, a very small corner of Louisiana, and I'm working in a tobacco industry. I don't smoke. I'm actually a health and wellness professional, and not at that point, but I am now.
Yeah.
And I'm essentially selling product, building business that is not helping my people. Frankly, it's hurting my people, and that put a fire in me. Like I got to
Yeah.
figure this out. I cultivated, or not cultivated. I honed some skills. That's for sure. They invest in their talent, and I learned how to articulate value proposition. And hone some skill sets that are transferable, right? And I just knew, man, with the opportunity of whether it's selling something that would benefit people that look like myself or whatever the function of the company is, I just knew I had to get out. And I think ultimately, I'm going to be honest, I think I manifested the next opportunity, which from the tobacco industry was an opportunity in the nonprofit space. And
Interesting.
I got an opportunity to interview for an organization, the National Black MBA Association, which is the longest running, or one of the longest running organizations that's prioritizing uh, uh, hmm, prioritizing getting black and brown folk jobs. Just to just say it frankly, 20,000 plus members in that organization, and they have 300 plus corporate partnerships. And I was put in a role where now, instead of selling cigarettes, I'm selling programming that is going to help these companies diversify their talent pipelines. That's going to help these companies retain black and brown folk. And oh, I could do that.
Oh, I think this is so interesting because I think this is something that I've heard a lot is, and I think we should talk about this manifesting, but I think this is a huge point in your life is a lot of people I feel like are in jobs. A lot of listeners are in jobs they may hate, that they may feel like, man, not only do I not necessarily like what I do on a day-to-day basis, but man, this company is hard to work with either because of
Mhm.
what they do to me or what it seems like they're selling. So can you talk about that transition point, right? Like where were you at mentally? What things did you do? How did you network? What were the tools that you used to make that transition from where you were to where you wanted to be?
Yeah, man. Like what's so great. Like I say it now jokingly, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. And I didn't realize what I was preparing for, but I was preparing for what I'm doing now. And for one, the amount of imposter syndrome I had working in that industry.
Mm,
I'm a man with, like I said, you see how you made a comment at the very beginning about my parents, but working in that industry, they didn't know any idea. They I was a shell of myself. They didn't even know I had tattoos. There was a lot about me that they didn't know, and I didn't feel as though I had the space to be myself. And um, I did a lot of reading. And one thing I realized along the way is that you know people listen to me, and that at the end of the day, what it all comes down to, whether we're talking about corporations and community, whether we're talking about your household and your relationships, whether we're talking, it all comes every transactions all come down to trust.
mhm.
And a very important book that I read at that point of my life when I'm trying to figure it out and get the heck up out of there was a book called The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. And
Mm.
ultimately, it crystallized some things for me that have helped me foster high trust relationships in a way that, have led to me being in the position that I'm in. I'm in a trusted leadership position that connects community to opportunity. So that book was really important for me to read. Michelle Alexander's um, uh, uh, the new Jim Crow, mass incarceration. Like I was doing a lot of reading at that point in time because again, I felt like I was doing work that wasn't beneficial to my people. I had to balance that energy, right? And I was finding myself, finding my voice, digging in, and really preparing myself. Again, I didn't know what I was preparing for, but as soon as I got that call, I won that interview, and I won a lot of other conversations and interviews since.
Yeah, it seems like in correct me if I'm wrong here. It seems like your ability to build trust really ties into what you know what is it dream.org is doing, like especially what you
Absolutely.
just said, bring like talk about that, like how do you build trust with the community, because I do think especially the black community is a lot smarter than people try to give the black community credit. You can't just be putting stuff up on your website and say we
Mm.
love black people, happy June 19th. Like it takes another level, I think, and speak to that, because I think companies oftentimes want that trust from the black community, and then they do a June 19th post and feel like, okay, what else do you need? And so I think this is really important for people to hear.
Yeah, for sure. Man, dream.org. I'm so blessed and to be real, to be I'm not just a part of this ecosystem, not just a leader within this organization. Um, it's an amazing organization, and um, what I say, and then I'll dive into specifically what the mission of dream.org is and so forth. But like you said, it's not what you put on your website. It's not um, what you communicate, externally to the public, communities of color specifically. So often we focus on what dream.org focuses on, and honestly what I focus on, which is why empathy again is on my chest, is how, right? It's
Preach.
how, like
Yes.
how trust, which is to many people this soft, intangible thing. So is how, like how is, you know, like I said, how, why, those are very important questions. But oftentimes we talk about what, we talk about
Mhm.
where we want to go, what we want to do. Dream.org, and the reason why they were just such this mm, soul and mission alignment was because Dream.org really prioritized how they do the work. And Dream.org brings people together across racial, social, partisan lines to create a future with freedom and dignity and opportunity for all. The overall mission of Dream.org is to close prison doors, open doors of opportunity, right? And there are
Yeah.
three social pillars, three divisions within the organization. There's Justice, which leads the largest national network of system impacted leaders. These are individuals that have been incarcerated. They advance bipartisan policy reform, meaning they work with folk on both sides of the aisle, and they support innovative tech-based solutions. They're responsible for the First Step Act, which
Wow.
Trump took responsibility for, but that's brought home over 20,000 people early, brothers and
Yeah.
sisters early, from incarceration. That's one pillar within Dream.org. Then there's Green for All, which works for cleaner air, water, affordable energy, good jobs for all. Two
Mhm.
things are going on right now in the world. Well, there's a lot of things going on in the world, but I'll say two things that we care about, especially. Um, One is the world is changing rapidly, fast, right? Because of technological innovation, technological advances. But also, this world is on fire, right? There's a climate problem. And the powers that be, the biggest corporations, the public sector, is really voicing that as well. So if you think about it, not too many people know, but $369 billion was authorized through the Inflation Reduction Act. And it's organizations like Green for All that are in place and in position to ensure that the communities most challenged by pollution are those that receive these funds, and these disadvantaged communities are prioritized to transform. So, without an organization like Greenfall, which has had political wins that amount to billions of dollars moved on the behalf of communities of color and challenged communities, that money would not, or probably the likelihood that that money would go where it needs to go,
Mhm.
right? How confident would you be that it would go to where it needs to go? And that's the type of work that Green for All is doing, ensuring not just that climate or pollution is being mitigated, but also ensuring that as new economies emerge because of um, authorizations, like I just mentioned, as generational wealth is created, that Black and Brown communities have access to opportunities in that new sector. And then
Mhm.
lastly, there's the tech program, which we create economic opportunity for the advancement of Black and Brown talent. Technology supercharges any solution. And I'll say that again, it supercharges any solution. So if you think about the solutions, you think about the the you think about how much talent from communities of color are able to do with the least. Imagine what talent with lived experience. Imagine what they'd be capable of if empowered and given access to resources, new skills that are relevant, in the future work. So not just good paying jobs, but also you're empowering talent that's gonna be solution oriented to come up with solutions that'll help transform these communities as well.
I love those three pillars. I think that they're really important. I have personal connections to all of them. I do think, for the sake of the fact that we don't have endless amounts of time for this podcast, I'm gonna get into one, right, that may actually get to all of them. And I think the big issue, um, that all of these areas seem to be solving to some extent is one that we actually already talked about, which is systematic barriers, right? Systematic racism that have been put in place. For the sake of our conversation and zooming us in, I'm going to focus on what that looks like in the tech community. So I was recently reading a Forbes article. Let me see if I can find the name here. Yeah. So the Forbes article was Rebuilding Tech for Diversity Through Times of Adversity. The article talked a little bit about all the layoffs that have been going on. Over 141,000 people have been laid off from tech. Some ways to fix it. They talk a little bit about how retention should be done. You should be looking at how you're kind of retaining people, but majority of the article focuses on hiring. I want to get your thoughts on this. Right, when we look at the tech industry and some of the layoffs that have taken place, 141,000 people let go. What is the aspect where these programs can really help these companies when they start to rebuild?
Yeah. Um, yeah, there's some layers. I'm gonna, for one, go back to one word that I mentioned before, which is trust,
Mhm.
right? So what's interesting, and I'm going to speak to trust in a couple ways, right? For one, like you said, you mentioned earlier the intelligence of communities of color.
Mhm.
You have companies that are servicing communities of color. However, their talent bases aren't reflective of the communities that they serve, right?
Mhm.
So for one, that's a signal, right? So in terms of how a company bridges that gap or does the work to bridge that gap and elevate trust between them and the community, and they can do that in various ways, obviously proclamations by their leaders, speaking to the importance of diversifying their workforce. In addition to that, making investments, not just investments, philanthropic, throwing money at this, throwing money at that, but actually investing into the upskilling, right? Invest in the training, invest in resources or drive access to resources that'll help talent of color, especially upskill, right? Because this
Mhm.
is important. This is a critical time where everybody should be considering their skill sets.
Mhm.
46% of the jobs that exist today are expected to be gone by 2030. There's also an additional prediction that 900,000 jobs will be created annually. That's 900 or 90,000? 900 new jobs, 900,000 new jobs annually between now and 2032. And that's especially because of that influx that $369 billion that's been authorized. We're talking an entire new industry, entire new sector that will be built because of that investment. So this is a critical time where everybody should be considering their skill sets, and what better a moment in time for companies, these powers that be, to say, hey, we want to do this different going forward.
And
We may have knee jerk reacted really fast as COVID hit, and we had to uh, sustain our day-to-day functions virtually. Like COVID, part of the reason why there's such huge layoffs is because companies saw success actually when COVID happened. They saw greater returns by expanding their technical teams, right? Because functions, business, look how we're convening right now, look how we're talking.
Yeah.
The infrastructure needed to sustain day-to-day operations, to expand e-commerce, technical talent was needed, and those are just a couple areas that I'm naming. But as on the back end of COVID, leaders at some of the biggest companies you can think of said, you know what, we may have overhired, and like I said, moving forward during this window where it's critically important that talent people upskill, companies could stand up and make investments and direct funds specifically to the upskilling of diverse talent.
And what I hear there as well, I think is important for listeners or anybody who's interested in this is that there, in what you just said, a lot of it, right, is that companies are making assumptions, right? There was this assumption that when they were going through their COVID spurts of growth, that same growth would be sustained on the other side of COVID. When it didn't mature, all of a sudden we're in kind of the situation we're in now, right? We won't get into corporate greed or some of the things that obviously play roles in
It's other
these,
stuff for sure.
but one of the other things I think what that made me think of as far as assumptions is we always want to be careful making the assumption that your talent, your black and brown talent, or whatever group you're looking at, needs programming if the job that's already being fulfilled by those people who don't have that talent, you're not requiring them to go through programming. Because I always think this is what I've found is oftentimes overlooked by companies that put efforts into programming and then wonder, well, we went through all these programming, why aren't we hiring these people? Because sometimes what I've found with some people we've worked with is that they'll create a program
Oh yeah.
for black and brown folks. But then they'll say you can't apply for the manager job until you've created the program. Well, they're 6 months into a 12-month program, and the job that they're trying to get becomes available, and they can't get it because they have to go through the program. So it's given to people who aren't in the program, who happen to be white males or people who didn't participate in the program. So I think talk to that nuance of programming and that nuance of upscaling where you really are pushing yourself, but also at the same time, the way companies need to understand what really upscaling is and programming is.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what you're touching on is um, uh, a programmatic area of success that Dream.org's tech program has historically had, which is not just getting the corporations to invest in the upskilling of diverse talent, but you also got to look under the hood and understand both your technical needs, right? Understand your technical needs, and then essentially create and or hold seats, right? You have to create pathways for the talent that you're investing to be able to fill those seats, right? There has to be an actual pathway for the talent into that company. And to your point, oftentimes, and that's why I mentioned earlier, companies throw money, right? There's philanthropic arms of these organizations. So, they allocate budget to diversity initiatives. But in terms of specifically ensuring that you're able to fill your talent pipelines with diverse talent, yeah, that requires it's mm, um, there's 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 energy needed on both sides, right? There's also buy-in needed from the leaders within that organization. Sometimes, and when I say leaders, managers, let's talk about, the people that are managing the talent that are coming in. You need buy-in, not just buy-in, they need empathy, right? So it's to stand up programming like what we've done, where we work with corporations, understand their technical needs, reverse engineer, create curriculum specifically for those roles, go into the community, find the talent, 7 touch interview process, high touch purposefully, so that we're not just making decisions based on where they went to school, um, uh, their their work experience, not those factors alone, but aptitude, mindset, their insatiable curiosity to learn. We're considering other factors. We're considering potential, right?
Mm.
We've struck in that sweet spot so that we can really get underrepresented talent a seat at the table. So I say all that to say, all that's great, but there's still work that the companies have to do. There's still training and work that leaders at those organizations have to do to ensure that they have empathy and understanding for the talent that's coming into their organization. Because you've mentioned layoffs, but let's name and be real. Another critical component is folk talent quitting, retention, right?
Hmm.
Retention for diverse talent in the tech sector is also abysmal,
Hmm.
and it's because this is still a culture. When there's only 8% of the talent, the technical workforce is black.
Yeah.
You can't expect that that's going to be a very
It,
empathetic or understanding culture.
yeah, I think it goes back to empathy. Like it's not even you have to be the same as every other organization in tech. You have to be better. You have to be more empathetic because guess what? There's less black people. Like there's just less people to be related. So it's not enough to do the bare minimum when
Right.
you're already that far behind. You don't show up to class when you've got a D and say I can coast the whole year. All I need is a C the rest of the year and I'll graduate.
That's
All of
real.
a sudden you have to put in that extra effort. So I do think it's so true that because I think a lot of times when we say empathy, when we say, hey, this is what we need empathy, people think, well, I've got a whole lot of empathy. I'm very empathetic, which is great, but it's also a muscle and it needs to be trained, it needs to be
Ooh,
used.
that's a
And
muscle.
when you have not used it or understand where you're missing things, where you have blind spots, where you realize, holy crap, I didn't realize that, and this is a real example, that when so and so was in a meeting who happened to be a black female is in a room and she's in the room to be the expert on legal matters, but then everyone talks over her and says, oh no, you don't understand that. I do understand it. It's why I'm in the room. That even if you're not the one who's talking over her and telling her, your empathy needs to be able to pick up on what's going on in that room because that's how you'll be able to change your retention. Because your recruitment efforts will never work if you don't fix those managers and those leaders' ability to be empathetic. And I
Right.
think that's what you're saying, and that's what I definitely relate to because I think that's
Yeah.
something that's often missed.
Yeah, and prioritize once you get the talent, invest in that talent. Prioritize, um, uh, prioritize cultivating that talent to be managers, to be leaders within that organization. Um, because that's part of the problem as well.
Yeah.
When I'm
You've done the hard
engaged,
part. You
yeah,
did the like getting the talent is so incredibly hard to find great people. It doesn't
yep,
make any sense to then not invest in them. It just
yeah,
doesn't make sense.
absolutely. And you said something, and I love the analogy, regarding this being a muscle. And again, as a health and wellness professional, you use it or you lose it, right? Like
Yes.
that's how our bodies function in the physical, but similarly to culture and really turning that corner and shifting the culture at these organizations. Just say that again: use it or you lose it.
And I love that too, and I love the holistic view that we're getting at in this conversation, which is just that empathy is complex, and just because I had a conversation once with my mother and my sister and understood a dynamic to womanhood that I never understood, which was like when we go into a Foot Locker, there's no woman section. Like all the basketball shoes, and she played like all the basketball shoes, I either got to get a man size or they got like a low key version of it that's in pink. And I was like, oh, but look, like you can still buy the dope shoes. They're in your size or whatever. But like it took me a while to understand that. But just because I had that moment does not mean I understand all of womanhood. I will lose my empathy for
Mhm.
understanding what it means to be a woman if I am not constantly putting myself in uncomfortable situations. And something I always love to say is, for me, it's never about being perfect. I'm never being perfect. I'm sure I've said things on these podcasts that are 100% wrong, and I will probably change my assumption on. But the important thing is to remain present. You have to be
Yeah.
present, not perfect. And I think I love what you're saying here, because I think that's really the key to empathy. Is people have this thing like, oh, I did it one time, like to your point of like training to lose. They do it one time, or they go to a diversity training and feel like, I really got it. That speaker was
Right.
great. It really made me feel like I understood what it was like to be Black in America. And
Yeah.
then they assume that lasts forever. I am empathetic in all situations, as if the complexity of what it means to be any person can be boiled down into a 45-hour, even a day training.
Mm.
It's complex.
And very, very complex. There was a point, but I lost it. It's all good. I know it'll come back. Uh, it'll come back.
No.
But indeed.
Well, let's talk about the future of dream.org. So, what are you guys doing right now, and what does the trajectory look like moving forward?
Yeah. I'll say this right now, right? The vision, and I'll speak to the vision of our program. Um, if we're successful, we're immersed in research and strategy right now. We're in a great space of understanding the ecosystems that we're in, which again is the economic advancement of Black and Brown folk, traditional and non-traditional career pathways, entrepreneurship. We're in a great space right now. If we're successful with the research, our strategic alignment, what that means in the future is equitable access to STEM, workforce development, and accelerator resources to diversify the sector and scale solutions. So that's one, equitable access. Um, the traditional and emerging technical workforce population will have proportionate Black and Brown representation. I mentioned before the latest stat I saw on in regards to the technical workforce: 8 to 10% of it being African American. Meanwhile, I think it was 8. Meanwhile, the population in this country were around 13% African American. Latinx population in this country is 19%. Meanwhile, their representation in the technical workforce significantly lower. So equitable access, like I said, proportionate representation in the technical workforce. Another key point: technical products and solutions, they won't perpetuate biases and systemic racism. Because we're primarily the downloaders and we're doing less uploading, systemic biases, racism, it's only being perpetuated. So
Mhm.
that would be another outcome of my department. Um, our solutions being successful. That would be another result. Fourth, there'd be more tech for good.
Mm.
As a result of empowering diverse talent with lived experiences from communities like the community I spoke of earlier, the result would be that the resources or the solutions that are created from that point forward, more of them are going to uh, uh, again um, be good solutions for the community. And then lastly, equitable access to entrepreneurial capital. One of the key barriers to diverse founders, especially on the technical side, uh, is capital, access to investment readiness trainings, social networks. Like if we're successful, there'll be equitable access to entrepreneurial capital and investments, which will ensure an equitable transition moving forward.
Yeah, and I could comment on the last one because I'm obviously a founder, been a tech founder for years now in this space. I've gotten to tech stars, I've done some things to know that I somewhat know what I'm talking about, not enough to say that I know what I'm talking about. But I will say I have been around in trying to raise money during the after George Floyd flux of all VCs saying we want to meet with Black and Brown founders. And then this last year, it came out that less than 1% of all funding went to Black and Brown founders. I was in the meetings you took, investors. You wanted to meet with me, but you didn't want to give me money. So you were fine wasting my time so you could post on social media that you met with X number of Black and Brown founders, but you weren't willing to give us the money. We're just as prepared as all those other founders out there, have just as much experience, just as much ideas, but you refuse to fund us, and that is on you. We
Mm,
don't need more trainings as a Black and Brown founder. I don't need more training. I need you to buck up and put your money where your mouth is, because if 90% of all startups fail, that's the job that you have. Choosing not to invest in me is nothing. It's proven that Black and Brown founders outperform returns on other investments. So the idea that there is something inherent that I would need to learn in
mm,
order for your investment to make monetary sense, I find as dismissive of my experience and the work that I have put into this point in comparison with founders that I know that aren't people of color. So I'll get off my soapbox because that is a touchy issue for me. Obviously, I've been trying to fundraise for the last couple of years and just hasn't happened or gotten close, and it falls out for whatever reason. But I
yeah,
appreciate you doing that last one, because that is something that is definitely close to my heart and something I think more people need to be paying attention to.
yeah. Well, that your lived experience, right? Um, you just shared your lived experience, which is the experience of, again, many diverse founders, and we're in a position now where it's like, you know what? Um, let's equal the playing field. Let's remove the excuses, the barriers, right? Because in some instances, again, because we're so talented and we do the most with the least, in some instances there are actual um, uh, opportunities to better understand the game and better articulate the value of your solution to these investors, right?
Mhm.
So F that. Let's remove these barriers and let's do the work of getting you these resources and preparing you to win at
Yeah.
that stage. That's where we are.
Yeah. And
And you know, it's founders like yourself who, as we're building this ecosystem, would be great mentors to those founders who truly need the support, the resources, and that's what we're doing too. Like mentorship is a
and
part of the ecosystem that we're building, as well as those strategic finance funding partners within the ecosystem.
and Kasheef, I love that. I think that community oriented thing is what's needed. I think the founders that I have met along the way, especially those that have been people of color, people who I call when I don't know what's going on or I need to figure something out. I think the part that, not even push back, but the part I really want to elevate in this conversation is the ownership of VCs.
Word.
If you have no intention of investing in a
Yeah.
company, especially a Black and Brown company,
Mm,
don't take the meeting. You're wasting
that's
my
real.
time. And you need to be real about the investments and how far they get and what they look like. Because honestly, I'm okay if you want to be racist. Just don't take my meeting. Don't waste my time. Like, because then I'm wasting time, my energy on pitching you on something you have already made a decision, regardless if it's implicit bias or not. And to me, that's why you're seeing a lot of burnout. Like in my communities, my Black and you're seeing a lot of burnout
Mm,
from founders, in especially Black, because we have been pitching
mm,
investors forever. And I will also say the other part of accountability is you don't invest in a Black and Brown company, but then you fund a white company to do the same idea, and that's the danger in VC is Black people see that,
yeah.
and a lot of Black people that I know have decided that founders, I am not going to go the VC route. I would rather bootstrap, have it be extremely hard, find a corporate partner, then go to you, explain why my idea works, show you my early traction, only for you to turn around, act like an industry expert, and give all my secret sauce to these other people to do my idea. Because there is a real danger that I don't think is talked about enough, especially in this startup space, of Black founders getting their ideas stolen. The idea then being given to white founders, and some maybe white founders are doing something similar, but the danger and the optics of what that looks like isn't like, oh, it's just startup space. This is what's been going on when we talk about systematic racism in this country for a very long time. So
Yeah.
you, as an investor who wants to invest in this community, need to understand the precedent you're setting. And if a founder is sharing too much of that secret sauce that makes their company, you need to stop them. You can't just let them tell you that, because this is the danger, that you're creating a precedent that will drastically affect not only the current standing of systematic racism, but indenture the current structures that exist. And so I'm obviously getting way too passionate about this, but it's just something that is close to me. So I'll shut up now. But any comments on that before we move to the outro here?
Yeah, no, no, I mean, I think, and that's also why, right? So we're talking about um, VC funding, but there are other funding vehicles, right? And I'm
Mm,
glad that you named corporate partnership or corporate funding, which is one of the events we're working really hard to stand up right now, which is a supplier diversity event, right? Connecting,
mhm.
I spoke about connecting community opportunity, connecting diverse tech founders to corporations. But then also on the other side, as I spoke again about all that money that's been authorized, and there's a lot of people talking the talk right now. It's entities like us that ensure that folk walk the walk as well. And I'm
Mhm.
having almost bi-weekly meetings right now with the DOE and leadership over there that's connecting me with other leaders and different funding vehicles. So there's not just VC funding. There's literal, there's real access and real opportunity right now to access public funding, meaning funding from the government. There's a lot of layers and barriers there too, and they're aware, and that's why we're having these conversations and figuring out ways to remove as many of those barriers as possible. And then there's also again opportunities on the private or corporate side. So let's talk about it all, right? And let's figure out what's best for folk at Black diverse founders at their maturity with their solutions, like what's best for you, you know?
Yeah, and honestly, if what you just said, if you're a black or brown founder, or you're a woman founder, an underrepresented founder, historically underrepresented founder,
Yes.
look for people like what Khalif just said, because if someone ever pitches you on the only ever vehicle for financial funding is, you know, is VC funding or something, like, run the other way. Like, do not. They're pitching you on something that may not be a fit for your company, so you really need to figure that out. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and wrap up with our final question. I feel like this is kind of a perfect segue. The last question we ask all of our guests is, what is the missing piece when we look towards kind of diversity or inclusion in society, your profession, or just kind of in the world in general? Obviously, there is not one answer, not one missing piece, but there are many. But in your opinion, what is one that we want to take this time to focus on?
I've said one word repeatedly, but I'll say another. Soul.
Mm,
That's what's missing, right? This work being done with soul, and when we speak of soul, we can then speak of empathy, right? Humanize these processes, ensure that people leading the charge, leading the transformations have lived experience. Like it's not rocket science, and unfortunately, um, you know, organizations, powers that be, are able to point to the fact that they can't find talent. We know that that's not the case, right? Diverse talent is out there in abundance. The most educated people in this country, maybe on the planet, but I know it's females of color, right? So there are a lot of qualified and diverse talent out there. But I say all to say this work has to be done with soul. It's not transactional. We have all these processes, all these systems, but let's humanize these processes. Consider, we call it human-centered design. Consider the experience of those on the other end. What's value to them? When you understand what their needs, what value is to them, you have a better chance of both attracting them and retaining them. And then, getting that buy-in from them to be a part of the transition forward. So just to go back to it, with the missing element, the missing ingredient is soul, brother.
I love it. Well, Kasheef, thank you so much for joining us. What do you have coming up? How can people find you? What events can they see you at?
Yeah, yeah. So dream.org again. We have an application open right now for our, we call it Dream Climate Tech Launchpad, which is uh, a fellowship, essentially an accelerator for diverse Black and Brown climate tech founders. 12-week program. We're doing it in partnership with Village Capital. So the application is open right now. You're going to get milestone based training. You're going to get investment readiness training. You're going to get mentors. You're going to get connected with an ecosystem to help you scale your solution, and be a part again of this transition forward. So, Dream Climate Tech Launchpad application is open now, closes June 12th. And what else could I say? Just be on the lookout. Again, we privately connect community to opportunities, and we have a scholarship fund which we leverage to get access to diverse talent, to help diverse talent upskill and either add to their toolkit or acquire the skills necessary to be a part of the tech sector, be a part of that transformation forward. So if you tap in, you go to dream.org. I'm speaking specifically of our tech program, but again, it's the Justice Program and Green for All. But as long as you tap into our network, you'll be kept abreast of all the opportunities that either would benefit you or people, within your community. So it's our goal to, you know, unlock and activate talent.
How do
And
people find you
yeah,
if
you
they
can
want to connect
find
with you?
I'm on LinkedIn as my full government, Kasheef Wyzard. I'm on Instagram, Cashwiz, Kashwyz. Yeah, those are the platforms, relevant
Fantastic.
platforms.
Well, Gajeev, I'm so sorry. I think I messed your name up earlier, but I apologize for that. But thank you so much for your understanding, and thank you to our listeners. This has been one of my favorite episodes by far. But we will catch you next time on Finding Diversity, the Missing Piece podcast. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for listening to Finding Diversity, the Missing Piece. You can expect new episodes monthly. And if you like the show, please subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. This helps others like you find the show. Finding Diversity, the Missing Piece is powered by Cape Inclusion. It's produced by Studio D Podcast Production, directed by Prescott Wong, and hosted by me, Justus Thompson. To learn more about how you can get started and to book a demo, visit us at capeinclusion.com.